Scott just made the point.
Thomas Jefferson,
You'll read to be a lot more secure, not just.
Well, our friend and mutual patrone, Instapundit Glenn Reynolds, who's a regular contributor here at PJTV, wrote a terrific and horrifying article entitled "Washington's Culture of Corruption Rots On," in which he outlines the power of the immortal federal bureaucracies. They're much like cancer cells, really, and that they multiply and metastasize and grow, and you can talk about treating them all you want to, but you just simply can't get rid of them. For example, I pointed out a year or two ago that NASA, once my most beloved organization on planet Earth, had the same budget in real dollars as they had back in 2006, the only difference being that in 2006 they were flying 4 space shuttles, and last year they didn't fly any because while NASA can provide outreach to Muslims praising them for their scientific achievements, America's space agency, for the first time since 1961, cannot put an American into space anymore. Now, fortunately, we have with us here Steve Green and Scott Ott. We filled out all of the prerequisite forms and we paid the appropriate licensing fees. So now that they're in with us, let's see how bad this kudzu has gotten. Gentlemen, in his article, Glenn recounts a grim milestone. It's been 1,000 days since the IRS story first broke. You'll remember that the IRS systematically investigated and withheld 501c3 status to Tea Party organizations while routinely granting them to left-leaning organizations. Now, despite high-ranking IRS official Lois Lerner taking the Fifth Amendment and hundreds of computers mysteriously vanishing or having their hard drives erased, she was placed on administrative leave, and then she was given a $42,000 bonus and then retired. But as Glenn Reynolds points out, if you think someone like Donald Trump can fix all of this, you may be in for a shock. Quoting Bloomberg's Megan McArdle, who writes, "Anything that gets done by Washington must be done by the civil service. These folks are lifers. You can't fire them. Because of the above-mentioned legislative compromises required, you also can't push a bill through that will let you fire them. And they, not the president and not the cabinet secretaries, are the folks who do most of what government does. The president can wave his hands like Jean-Luc Picard and say, make it so, but if they don't wanna, they ain't gonna." So, Scott, I think you might say that the government and the people's reaction to the IRS scandal was kind of a dry run for the Clinton email scandal. Do you think the American people are now gotten so cynical that they've given up on the rule of law completely from the government?
Well, I think some of them see it that way. Those who would, kind of come from your side of the aisle see it that way. Others don't see it as a problem whatsoever. I mean, in fact, what they see as a problem is the idea that you would fire anybody from the government, because we don't want people to be jobless and homeless and stuff like that. I mean, these are public servants who have given up so much that they could have had in the private sector in order to serve the public. So I think that, there's a divergence of opinion in the United States about what this exactly means. But I have brought up this very point numerous times when people told me what a great blessing a constitutional term limits amendment would be if we were to term limit Congress, for example. And I said, look, what happens is when you term limit Congress, all the people who actually do the work of Congress stay there. They don't, when your congressman leaves, his staff moves on and works for another congressman. They never leave. They're there perpetually. It's the perpetual bureaucracy that we have to address, and we need to start getting a system back in place where these people are held accountable for their actions, and maybe we have to term limit the bureaucrats.
Yeah, it used to be when somebody took office, they brought in, back in like the 1800s, early 1900s, guy get elected senator, he would bring his people with him. What if maybe he was an oil baron or something? He'd bring his staff with him. Everybody who worked for the previous guy was fired. That's how things actually changed and got done there. Steve, Glenn points out in this article that this doesn't have to happen by conspiracy and secret order because virtually all civil service workers are Democrats, and they see no problem at all going after small government Republicans who want to take away their iron rice bowl of lifetime employment and deluxe benefits. They simply hive mind their way into these kind of abuses, don't they? You don't have to have this giant order coming down from Obama or anybody else.
No, you really don't. About 100 years ago or so, the progressives did 2 terrible things to this country, and they were just getting started. And the first and obvious one that everybody knows about is the income tax amendment. And the other less obvious one, because it sounds like such a good idea, was reforming the civil service. You know, it used to be our government was small because it couldn't raise that much money. 40% of Washington's revenue used to come from liquor excise taxes, and the rest mostly came from things like import duties and various fees. And so Washington couldn't get very big because there just wasn't all that much money it could raise.
Right.
And with the adoption of the income tax amendment, Washington's ability, well, and also I should say the Federal Reserve, Washington's ability to either raise money by sucking the life out of people or to simply create money out of thin air, which the Fed has the authority to do, Washington can grow to enormous size, and it is enormous size. It's up to almost $4 trillion a year, and it would be even bigger. It would be huger than that if we hadn't gotten a GOP Congress sworn in 2011 to thwart all of these big spending plans that President Obama, Nancy Pelosi, and Harry Reid had and continue to have. But reforming the civil service was such a subtle way to screw the country, and I'm not kidding about this. Bill, you say a senator would come in with his own people as soon as he got elected and get rid of the dead weight from the other guy. Well, you know what? Presidents used to engage in what was called patronage. A new president would get sworn into office, and he'd fire all the old federal bureaucrats, and he'd bring in his patrons, his cronies. And okay, maybe that's not such a great deal. However, it's much better, believe it or not, than having this permanent civil service because, yeah, they were incompetent, yeah, they were corrupt, but it was a new group of corrupt and incompetent people every 4 years or every 8 years, depending on how often we change presidents. And so you didn't get these guys with permanent careers, with huge benefits, being unfireable and feeling confident in being unfireable, that they can screw us over. And so we have this vast government with this professional bureaucracy that nobody can get rid of, and it's all thanks to the Democrat and Republican progressives of 100 years ago. We're just saddled with this beast now.
That's right, exactly right. You may get a new Republican president and he'd bring in his cronies, but they'd be Republican cronies. And if you got tired of Republican administrations, you get a Democrat, he'd bring his cronies, but they'd be Democratic cronies.
Bingo.
They're still cronies.
New guys, just
they're
a
immortal.
broom every 4 years, 8 years.
They're there forever, and they're all Democrats, and they're going to stay that way. I just want to say two things about this, because the IRS scandal is a really interesting example of how this works. It wasn't like Barack Obama got on the phone and said, all right, listen, here's the deal. I want you to investigate these 501c3s for the Tea Party. Barack Obama made his politics very clear. Barack Obama made it very clear he's not a fan of the Tea Party. Lois Lerner is ideologically aligned to Barack Obama, and so she made certain things happen and certain things happen. But basically, it came down to large numbers of individual people working on their own initiative to do what they wanted to do for the sake of their own jobs, which means destroy Republicans as much as possible. Now, I know what the consequences of comparing all of this to the Nazis are, but there's a very profound example here that I want to bring up. I'm not trying to compare the Democrats to the Nazis. The Nazis had nothing like that kind of money to work with. But what used to happen in the Third Reich was this. Adolf Hitler was actually an extremely lazy man and a very, very poor administrator. He laid out, just let me know if any of that rings a bell. He laid out a series of philosophical positions and broad objectives, and then everybody in the pyramid structure below him did something that a historian called working towards the Fuhrer. There was a guy who made a speech during the Third Reich who said, it's our job to work towards the Fuhrer. We know what Adolf Hitler wants. It's our job to work towards what he wants rather than waiting for him to send the orders down. It's exactly what's happening with our federal bureaucracy. But folks, if Lois Lerner can basically wipe hard drives clean and use the IRS as a weaponization against part of the country, and if we have the same problem now with Hillary Clinton, then we no longer have a federal government that has any respect for the rule of law whatsoever. It doesn't matter who gets elected. And unless we do something about this social compact, the idea that we agree to be governed by these people because they're beholden to the same laws that we are, and if we don't like them, we can throw them out. When that is no longer true, then you may start to see the kind of revolution that's really going to matter. Because if the big tax-paying middle of this country, the law-abiding center that makes everything work, if we decide to go out on strike, it's going to be a whole nother ballgame. And that time is coming real soon. For everyone here at PJTV, including my friends Steve Green and Scott, I'm Bill Whittle. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.